Okay, hello everyone, and welcome to a recorded session of myself, Elliot, going through a particular challenging humanities poetry STEM question with you all, which is like those that appear on the GAMSAT. So, just very briefly, my name's Elliot. I'm a medical doctor who did the GAMSAT a few years ago now and have been the humanities tutor at GradReady for the past several years. I'm also a PhD graduate and a lawyer as well. And so humanities is my specialty, and I'll take you through a very tricky poetry MCQ, which a lot of my students have a lot of trouble with. It's called Dover Beach by Matthew Arnold. We'll read through it first together, and then I'll talk you through some important points. And poetry, I think, is very tricky for a lot of us because it's not really focused on that much at school in Australia, unfortunately. But one of the there's a few maybe questions to start out with when you're approaching a poetry question. First is whose perspective are we getting this poem from in this story? Is it the narrator as a fly on the wall, or is it from a particular character's perspective? For example, where is the poem? And also looking out for things like metaphors and similes and analogies, which will be really important for this particular poem here. And I'll talk about what those concepts mean soon. So this is Dover Beach by Matthew Arnold. The sea is calm tonight. The tide is full, the moon lies fair upon the straits. On the French coast the light gleams and is gone. The cliffs of England stand, glimmering and vast, out in the tranquil bay. Come to the window, sweet is the night air, only from the long line of spray, where the sea meets the moon-blanched land. Listen, you hear the grating roar of pebbles which the waves draw back and fling. At their return, up the high strand, begin and cease, and then again begin, with tremulous cadence slow, and bring the eternal note of sadness in. Sophocles long ago heard it on the Aegean, and it brought into his mind the turbid ebb and flow of human misery. We find also in the sound of thought, hearing it by this distant northern sea. The sea of faith was once, too, at the full, and round earth's shore lay like the folds of a bright girdle furled, but now I only hear its melancholy long withdrawing roar, retreating to the breath of the night wind, down the vast edges drear and naked shingles of the world. Ah, love, let us be true to one another, for the world, which seems to be before us like a land of dreams, so various, so beautiful, so new, hath really neither joy, nor love, nor light, nor certitude, nor peace, nor help for pain. And we are here as on a darkling plain, swept with confused alarms of struggle and flight, where ignorant armies clash by night. So now we have a series of questions coming from the stem, and we'll go through these sequentially. For the poet, the world is what? So we're kind of being asked here for the poet, who we're kind of getting the perspective through a particular character they're crafting here. How are they regarding the world? So this is not just a particular part of this scene, which is quite plainly seems to be a person who seems to be standing on maybe a beach and looking over the sea of faith and observing different parts of nature. And so we're asking, what is this world that this character is inhabiting? How do they see this world? So stunning, and every moment is precious, a battlefield, bereft of joy, or a land where wishes can come true. So, one of the easiest things to do when approaching humanities questions is just trying to, take out the ones which are probably plainly not correct. So a land where wishes can come true is not something that was really, discussed. There wasn't any talk of wishes or anything of this nature. So we can really cross this out to start with, which will make our life a little bit easier. Stunning, and every moment is precious. This also doesn't maybe quite talk to us. There's a lot of discussion in this poem about, I guess, the tremendousness of nature. It's glimmering and vast. There's really loud and frightful things kind of going on. But this is more a reflection of the actual material things that the poet is observing, but not the deeper meaning of what this world is. Because it's asking what the world is for this person, right? It's not asking, what does this world appear as such. And when we get down to these two, that kind of reasoning will help us here as well. Because even though the author talks quite frequently about things he sees, which might appear like a battlefield. So, at the end here, where ignorant armies clash by night, there's also a line here where we talk about pebbles, which the waves draw back and fling. Kind of sounds like quite violent, some kind of battle going on, some clashes, and this kind of this I guess visuality or sound of the waves crashing into the shore kind of makes you think about this, battles and conflict and such. However, again, this is something that the author observes, which is like, a couple of points about the world that he sees, but not what is for him. And the most important thing here is that it's bereft of joy, and this is really clear. So bereft meaning no joy, more or less, or lack of joy, and we can see this through a number of major clues which help us with this. And probably the main thing initially is this eternal note of sadness in. So he's seeing this these waves and water come back and forth, and it's always got this eternal note of sadness in it. It might crash at the shoreline, but it's got an eternal note of sadness in it as well. And Sophocles, sorry, I'm butchering that up, but heard this long ago, and also thought, there's human misery in that as well. So this is also more evidence for us. And now this poet only hears its melancholy, long, and withdrawing roar. So there's a lot of really strong tones and language here to describe how depressing it is. So we'll go with bereft of joy here, which is the correct answer. Now, this is quite a quick, tricky question this round. Overall, the tone of the poem is what? Hopeful, unhappy, resolute, or wistful? So if we just said, this is bereft of joy, we might be thinking, well, it's unhappy. But this is probably just a little bit too simplistic of what the tone is. So the tone is kind of, I guess, like the feeling of the poem, which intermeshes with the rhythm as well as the language used, and how it's kind of pitched. So it's not just unhappy. It's not only depressing. Like we said, there are other aspects where he describes, the nature is glimmering, vast. He's amazed at the waves roaring. There's all other kind of things in here, which isn't. It's not just flat unhappiness. Being just a tone that's unhappy would be very depressed constantly. It might be lacking joy. And again, we're supported by lines like this: hath neither joy nor love, no light. But it's not just purely unhappy. Which is maybe just a bit too strong here. So we'll cross up unhappy for now. There's no real indication of resoluteness of the resolve of this author to kind of resist the powers of nature. So we can take out resolute. The 250, when we do this 50-50, the two remaining choices is hopeful or wistful. Now the difference between these two is really important. And if we look at the end of this poem, which is kind of the important part to answer this question, because it really helps bring home the tone of the poem. You can't say that really quickly. He talks here to a lover. The lover might be with him, might be speaking metaphorically to them perhaps. But he's saying, let us be true to one another, for the world which seems to be before us like a land of dreams, which seems quite okay, is actually really depressing. It's got neither joy nor love nor light, nor peace nor help for pain, etc. But he's kind of saying, there's this kind of world before us which is quite terrible, but let us be true to one another. As a kind of solace from that, as something, to make it more bearable, to be, easier to deal with. So there's that kind of feeling of what we might immediately call a hopefulness, right? However, it is not just a simple hopefulness. And this is where we have to kind of differentiate between the meaning of these words. So hopeful, if we think of, us standing at present, we're hoping, this year will be a little bit less, tumultuous for everyone around the world as compared to last year, perhaps. So this is, hopeful of just pure, what's happening in the future. Being wistful is kind of having some kind of hopefulness, but based on some kind of experience in the past. Kind of hoping for like a repetition of something. You're wistful for a memory to kind of reoccur and make you feel, happy again, for example. And so this is really important. This person's talking to a love, and is pleading for them to be true to them. And what will become very clear in the next couple of questions as well is that the poet is using the sea he's looking out to, the sea of faith, which is very obviously a metaphor for his faith internally. He's saying it was once full, but now it's kind of withdrawn and it's empty. And he's actually appealing to his love to be true to one another to help restore this faith that he has, this faith that he could have in the world to combat this kind of melancholy, this depressingness. So it's thinking back to his relationship, perhaps, or his love, or whoever he was entwined with, which probably helped his sea of faith to be full at one point, and help rekindle that faithfulness to, bring it out again. So it's this wistfulness of something in the past. So again, this explanation will help a little bit with the next question, which is, what does the poet mean by sea of faith? So faith advances and retreats like seawater. Faith is pointless in such a turbulent world. Faith, like the sea, is almost never ending. Faith is reflected in the beauty of the ocean. So this one's probably not too hard. And like I said, now this is one of the points which is really important in poems, is looking for these kind of metaphors. So this sea of faith is not just a literal sea, perhaps in front of the poet, right? It's a reflection of his internal feelings of faith, I guess. So another really classic metaphor is something like, the world is a stage. The world's not literally, a stage, but it's being used perhaps as someone who's regarding it as a stage. So it's always an opportunity to perform, maybe, or to be recognized or seen, for example. So the sea of faith for this author is a metaphor which is reflecting the fullness of his faith. So this is really important. So we spoke about the author's appeal to faith here. Let us be true to one another, for the world which seems to be like, land of dreams, etc. Focusing on this idea of faith. So it's appealing to his love that we need to rekindle this faith to, tackle this depressing world. So it's not pointless. He's definitely not saying faith is pointless. His might be empty at the moment, but it's definitely not pointless. He attaches a lot of importance to it. And likewise, faith like the sea is almost never ending. This is not true, because he directly says that it's now empty and depressing at the moment. So it's not never ending. It can be empty, so we can take that away. And faith is reflecting the beauty of the ocean. Would kind of be a very simplistic way of maybe understanding that it's a simple reflection of the beauty of the ocean, because that's not really indicated in the text. So we can cross that out as well. So the best answer is faith advances and retreats like seawater. And again, these last two paragraphs are really important. But the author focuses here on how it was once full and now it's retreating again, and that's reflecting how his emotional feeling is like. Again, this is a very tricky question, but I think now, after all the explanation we've done, this might be a little bit easier. So the poet suggests that the solution to the world's problems will come from what? So we're probably quite tempted to say love. We're already talking about that he may be appealing to a love, to help him here, deal with this melancholy world, which also might be some kind of conviction, with this love, this conviction that things can be better, for example. There's not really any appeal to truth here. This is something we can probably get rid of quickly. There's nothing that really has helped us here. But if you've been following my explanation so far, you will pull away from love and conviction, because again, these last two paragraphs, the author has an overwhelming focus on faith. And this is where he is suggesting where the world can actually be better at this point. This my sea of faith was full before, it's now empty, but love, let's be true to one another. For this world which seems so bad, we can help restore this faith again, as it was, is kind of like the subtext to this question. So it's not just a matter of love or conviction, it's about faith primarily, which is the really important theme of this entire poem. So in the context of the poem, the word cadence in the second stanza refers to what? The tendency of the sea to look dark, the vastness of the sea, that the beauty of the sea is breathtaking, or the rhythm of the sea movements. So this one's quite easy, and it's really important for these kind of questions. When I'm saying in the context of the poem, you're not just looking at the word, and just defining the word isolated, abstracted from everything. You have to look at it in the context of the poem, which is problematic if you skip the, reading the text and just go straight to the questions, which some students do. You can sometimes miss the context. But if we go to the second stanza and have a look at the cadence here, with tremulous cadence slow, this is referring to the sea coming back in and forth. So you hear the grating roar of pebbles, which the waves draw back and fling. At their return, up the high strand, begin and cease, and then begin again. So it's talking about the waves coming back and forth, and then beginning again. So it's about the movement of the sea, or the rhythm of the sea movements. Now, the final question we have: the poet sees nature as a metaphor, an ideal, an analogy for life, or the ultimate romantic concept. So when we're talking about nature here, we're talking about the entire scene here, the entire world that the author is viewing. It doesn't seem like it's the ultimate romantic concept. He talks about it very violently, very depressing. It doesn't seem entirely romantic. There are a lot of metaphors. We spoke about a lot of metaphors in this, but importantly, nature is not just purely in its individual components. There's a lot of metaphors there, but the entire thing is not a metaphor. And this is where it helps to distinguish between what a simile is, what a metaphor is, and what an analogy is. They're very closely linked concepts, but are quite different. We spoke about a metaphor, which is, they're all somewhat comparisons, where a metaphor is kind of comparing something with something else, which is obviously quite different. So like, the world is a stage, while a simile is kind of this key difference is it uses language such as, like. So the people moved like blades of grass in the wind, for example. So it's comparing two things which you wouldn't normally compare, but and a simile uses this kind of like or as or similar to words to make that comparison, where a metaphor does not. An analogy, meanwhile, is kind of a broader message within a story or a fable or a scene, for example. And so a metaphor is too small of an answer to go here. We don't have any indication that nature is an ideal as such. It's very material here. So the best answer is that it is an analogy for life. So we've just gone very quickly through, I guess, you don't have that much time in the GAMSAT to go through these any slower than we did, but we went through some quick explanations here. We correctly answered all of these questions in a very difficult poem, and I hope you found it useful just to have a look at the kind of ways that some of us think when we're approaching these kind of difficult questions, and I hope it was useful to you, and hopefully we look forward to seeing you soon. Thank you.